All right, Genesis 29. Genesis 29. We came to this last time, and I want to say that of all the services during the week, I think my favorite one is Sunday school. And because we just go right to the Bible and we dig right in, and I enjoy my Sunday school class because the reason you're here, for the most part, is because you want to go a little deeper, and I appreciate that. So Genesis 29, we see Jacob went on his journey, and he came to a well, and they said, well, we're all waiting for someone to come and take the top off the well so we can water our flocks. And so what does Jacob do? Well, let's go to verse number 10. It says here, and it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And so what do we see Jacob doing here? We see Jacob showing some initiative and some strength by moving the stone from the mouth of this well, this big stone, and watering Laban's flock. Laban is his mother's brother. And you see that sort of initiative, you see that sort of strength, then guess what? If you're Laban and you hear about that, you're like, that's the kind of son-in-law I want. That's the kind of guy I want my daughter to marry. He's got initiative and he's got strength. And sometimes, as everybody knows, when you see someone that you're interested in, as, say, a potential wife or husband, sometimes that gives you a little bit of energy and strength and initiative. And so, for whatever reason, Jacob is showing his strength and initiative. And in verse number 11, and Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Jacob kissed Rachel. Now, a lot of times, people read too much into this little phrase here. It was a traditional family greeting to kiss someone who is your relative. And so this was nothing unusual for Jacob, who is her, let's see, that would be her cousin, first cousin, to kiss her. But one of the commentators said he probably enjoyed this kiss a little too much, okay? And so here is Jacob kissing Rachel, and then it says he lifted up his voice and he wept. And likely he didn't weep out of sorrow, but he was weeping out of joy because he had finally located the family that he came over 500 miles to find. And remember, we kind of put that in perspective. He probably went the distance from Abingdon, Virginia to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so that's a pretty long distance he went. And I don't know if you've kept up with these Buddhist monks on the Walk for Peace, but that's kind of how Jacob traveled. He just took his staff and he just walked over 500 miles. And that is quite an adventure for him. And so he is rejoicing. He has watered Laban's flock. He has kissed. He has found his cousin Rachel. And now he is rejoicing with weeping. And so Jacob is here, all kind of emotions going through his head. Verse number 12. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Now, the word brother in the Bible oftentimes just simply means a near kinsman or close relative. And so you would call someone your brother. That could be a cousin. It could be an uncle. It could be something like that. But he made very clear in verse number 12 he was Rachel's son, which means that he was Laban's nephew. He was Laban's nephew. All right, verses 13 and 14, and it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, and I can just imagine Rachel coming back and, 90 miles per minute, I met this man, and he moved the stone, and he watered all the flock, and So anyway, but once Laban heard what had happened, he ran to meet him, and embraced him and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said unto him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. And so Laban warmly welcomed Jacob, his nephew, into his whole. So verse number 15. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? Now this is a verse I remember someone preaching one time, and the way they portrayed Jacob was that he was kind of laying around on the couch all the time, and he's just eating all of Laban's food and not doing any work. And so Laban's like, all right, what have I got to pay you to get out there and work, okay? But I don't think that's the impression here. We've already seen that Jacob is industrious. Jacob is strong. He's willing to work. And so what Laban is doing here is he's asking Jacob, how much compensation would you need in order to continue working for me? If you want to be my laborer, how much do I have to pay you? That is what Laban is asking Jacob. It's nothing bad on Jacob's part at all. And so verses 16 and 17 tells us what he wants. It says, And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And so Laban had 2 daughters. It's interesting right here. We got a little bit of foreshadowing because we see here, what do you want to work for me? And then it says Laban had 2 daughters. So it's pretty obvious what he's going to want. But it says here, Leah was tender-eyed. Now, this phrase here, there is some controversy about what this phrase actually means. One interpretation is that her eyes were weak. And so she kind of, you see people sometimes have very weak eyes. I'm reading a book called The House of Seven Gables. And the woman is nearsighted, I think, and so she has to squint in order to see people, or she's farsighted, I forget which one that is. And so maybe, she had some eye problems or something like that. But I prefer the other interpretation, okay? I didn't realize there were 2 interpretations of what it means to be tender-eyed. There are others who say that her beauty was in her eyes. And so the one thing that stood out about Leah was her beautiful, tender eyes. And so another person said that maybe she had blue eyes, and that the word tender meant her eyes were a little bit lighter. But in any case, what Leah was known for was her eyes, but what Rachel was known for, it says she was beautiful and well-favored, is that she was she had the shape of a beautiful woman. She was very shapely. And so we see here, Jacob, you have one that has perhaps a beautiful face. That's the first thing you see about her. And that's one thing when it comes to modesty. It says women ought to draw attention to their face and not to their bodies. But so we have Leah with a beautiful face, perhaps. I'd like to think that. And then we have Rachel with a beautiful body. And guess what Jacob chooses? Which one do you think, Noah?
I'd guess probably the face.
Oh, okay. So Jacob's a spiritual young man who's going to choose the face. That's what you think, right?
Yeah, because he's loyal.
Because he's loyal. Okay, well, let's see, okay? We get the answer in verse number 18. And Jacob loved, he went for the beautiful body, Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Jacob chose the woman that he had met by the well. He chose the girl with the beautiful body, Laban's younger daughter, Rachel. Now, what is Laban's response? Verses 19 and 20. Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. And so Laban was favorable to this arrangement. And so Jacob agreed to work 7 years for who? For Rachel. That's right.
He chose the one with the body because he had better personality.
I don't know. Oh, Noah back there. You're thinking about this too much, Noah. But anyway, we see here in the ancient Near East, it was not unusual for a man to give money to the father of the bride. in order to get his daughter. And one person, Adam Clark, in his commentary, it was kind of interesting. He said that today, I guess when he wrote his commentary, it's more of a thing for the bride's family to give money to the husband's family. And he said, women just aren't as valuable anymore. They don't do as much or something like that. Old Adam Clark, I was kind of disappointed in his commentary there. But anyway, in that day, the husband-to-be would give money to the bride's family. And in this case, Jacob didn't have much money, and so what do you do if you don't have much money? You work. And so Jacob said, I am willing to do this. I am willing to work 7 years for who? Rachel. That's right. I'm willing to work 7 years for Rachel. And this is always, Valentine's Day is coming up. People see this as a very romantic thing. It says, the 7 years seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. In other words, the days of work and toil were really nothing to him because he was working and toiling for who? Rachel. Good. Everybody's got that. Rachel. All right. So everything's going along great. Verse 21. Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. So everything's looking good, isn't it? And it came to pass, a wedding feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. So do we see any problems in these verses? Any problems here? Everything going pretty normal? Going fine?
I think later on there's going to be problems.
Uh-oh. Noah thinks there's going to be problems later on. I agree, Noah, because he had worked for who? Rachel. And he was getting who? The father was giving him Leah. And so the question is, how in the world do you marry the wrong girl? Well, it does say here that it was in the evening that she was brought to Jacob. And so it was dark outside. We don't have these big security lights like we have outside the church here. So it was dark. Also, back in that day, it was normal on the wedding night, for the bride to wear a very thick veil over her face. And so that's another idea. Darkness, there's a veil over her face. There's a lot of other ideas too, in the culture. It could be that, Jacob in that culture did not spend much time with Rachel during that 7 years. And so it could be that, this was like the first time he'd seen her in a long time. And so with the veil and with the darkness, he didn't, recognize her. But in any case, he went and he spent the night with the wrong woman, with Leah instead of Rachel. And so why is this particularly interesting when it comes to Jacob? Well, let me read some verses and see if you can pick up where I'm going with this. Proverbs 22, verse 8 says, he that soweth iniquity shall reap vanity. Hosea 8, verse 7, for they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. Look at Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Verses 12 and 13. No, Hosea chapter 10. I got my O's and E's mixed up. Hosea, back in the Old Testament prophets, first of the minor prophets. I'm sorry. Hosea chapter 10.
I think what most Bibles are teaching you about God is that if you don't preach Him or you just do what He doesn't want, that you won't
Ooh, that's very insightful. What he said.
Bible show that when you disobey or do something that he doesn't want you to do, it normally doesn't end out how the person wanted it to end out in the end.
That's exactly. Yeah, that's what the Bible's teaching here. That's good. I ask, do we see a reason why these verses are pertinent to Jacob's situation? And what Noah is saying is exactly correct, is that when you do things that you know God doesn't want you to do, then guess what? It doesn't work out in the end.
You end up with his wrath.
What's that?
His wrath.
Yeah, his wrath. That's right, his anger, his judgment. And so that's a good part of it. That's a good part of it here. And that is, what you sow, you will reap. And so what had Jacob sowed in the past? Well, he pretended to be Esau. And we have Leah pretending to be Rachel. And then, it's kind of an interesting thing in it. We see a parallel here. But Hosea chapter 10, verses 12 and 13, I'll go ahead and read these verses even though you figured out where I'm going with this. Sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. Ye have plowed wickedness, ye have reaped iniquity. Ye have eaten the fruit of lies, because thou didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men. So this is exactly what Noah was saying here. If we sow righteousness, we reap mercy. If we sow wickedness, we reap iniquity and the judgment that comes with it. One other place talks about sowing and reaping. Look at Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6, beginning of verse 7. Galatians 6, beginning of verse 7. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And then there's one verse that's added on here, verse 10. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. And so whatever we sow, that we're going to reap. This is a principle in the Scripture. And so as we think about gardens in about 2 months, put out your peas. What are you going to get? Peas. Put out your beans. What are you going to get? Beans. You put out your corn. What are you going to get? Corn. What you sow, you're going to reap. And so what I would like to suggest is the deception that Jacob had been sowing, he is now reaping. And so we're seeing that happen right here before us. All right, back to Genesis 29, verse 25. And it came to pass that in the morning, when the light came out, right? Okay. Behold, it was Leah. And he went right to Laban, and he said, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Why then hast thou beguiled me? Why have you tricked me? And so, I've got this in dark print, which means this is an application for us today. God sometimes allows other people to do to us what we have done to others, hoping that it'll bring about in our lives understanding and repentance. You get that? We do something to someone else, then God oftentimes allows someone else to do that to us. And hopefully at that point we'll understand, oh, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, that wasn't good, was it? And then after we understand this truth, there's repentance, and we can get right with God. But, what do we see here?
In the book of Daniel, doesn't it speak about 12 gates? And one of the gates is what goes around. So
What goes around comes around. That's right. That's right. It's like a cycle. It's like a cycle, you know. Yep. Yeah. What goes around comes around. That's right. It's a cycle. So Jacob pretended to be Esau. Now Leah pretended to be Rachel. He sowed, and now he is reaping. And hopefully it'll cause him to repent. But it doesn't. It doesn't. He doesn't get right with God yet. Family Bible Note says this: those who wickedly deceive others should not be surprised if others deceive them, and they experience the evils of it through life. So if you're in the business of deception, then don't be surprised if someone deceives you. Isaiah 33 verse 1 says, woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they did not deal treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. When thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. So however you treat others, that is how, in this what goes around comes around, you will be treated as well. This is the natural course of events. So verse number 26. And this is what really gets me. This is what really makes you want to throw something at Laban. Because Laban says, it must not be so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. The reason you want to throw something at Laban is because, number one, if this is true, he should have said something before Jacob agreed to work for 7 years. But number two, Laban is one of those people who always has an answer, a reason, or an excuse for everything. In other words, Laban is one of those people, he's never in the wrong because he always figures out a reason why he's right. Okay? Don't you love those people? Those people who they just do what they want, and they always give you a reason why they did it, and they never say, I was wrong, or I did you wrong, or something like that.
He messed up this time. You never told him that. So technically it's on his fault for not telling him that. Wouldn't you say that?
Well, what Noah is saying here is that he tricked him. He did not tell him that he was going to have to give him the older daughter. And so Laban was in the wrong. Yes, you are correct. Laban was in the wrong. But this is where it's interesting to think back to Jacob and Isaac. And Jacob tricked Isaac into giving him the blessing. And yet, when Esau came and said, don't you have a blessing for me? Isaac said, no, I've already given away the blessing. And so at this point, we see here that Jacob has already had marital relations with Leah, and so they are officially married. And so, in a sense, just like Jacob had already gotten Esau, in the same way, Laban had already gotten Jacob as well. And so, verse 27, here is what Laban comes up with. He says, fulfill her week. Give Leah a 1 week honeymoon. Fulfill her week. And we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And so Laban says, okay, buddy. You give me 7 more years, and then in 7 days, I'll give you Rachel to be your wife as well. That's what Laban says here. And so what does Jacob do at this point? Jacob really wants Rachel. So it says, and Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And so Laban, it says here, was always changing Jacob's salary. Laban was one of those bosses that you hate because he's always changing the terms of the deal. And so he says, wait a week, I'll give you Rachel if you'll work for me another 7 years. Remember, Jacob loved Rachel, right? And so it was a deal he felt like he could not refuse. So Jacob signs on the dotted line, so to speak, and says, okay, I will work for you another 7 years in order to pay off what I owe you for Rachel. Now the big question is, what should Jacob have done in this situation? Any thoughts on that? Everybody shaking his head back there. What do we do? What do we do in this situation? You know, and I'm not going to say what you or I would have done, but it's always great when you look at these Bible characters and you say, what should he have done, right? My opinion on this.
Just find out what type of person he is before agreeing.
Well, I mean, so yeah, that's a good thing. Find out what type of person Laban was before agreeing. But that's what's called hindsight. And hindsight's 20/20. You know, Jacob didn't realize that his uncle was better at deceiving people than he was. You know, that's the thing, is he didn't realize what his uncle was like. And so here's my opinion on what Jacob should have done. Okay? Can we agree that God designed marriage to be between one husband and one wife? Okay? We can agree that, right? That is God's design for marriage. Okay. That being the case, we consider when Isaac wrongly blessed Jacob instead of Esau, Isaac told Esau that it was the providence of God and to accept it. Now that's back in Genesis chapter 27. Do you remember that? Verses 33 through 37. It says, and Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. Yea, and he shall be blessed. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, thy brother came with subtlety, and has taken away thy blessing. And he said, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And he said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him thy Lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And so, what Isaac is saying here to Esau is, I've blessed him. And also you have in the background as well the prophecy that the younger would be over the elder. And Isaac said, I've done what I've done. He received the blessing. Let's get on with it, Esau. Let's get on with it, Esau. Well, if polygamy is sinful, and if Jacob had already been married to Leah, then I believed that Jacob should have just accepted the fact that God had meant him to marry Leah instead of Rachel. And so that's my opinion about what he should have done. He should have said, well, God ordered this, even through the trickery of Laban, and I am going to marry Leah, and I am going to be happy with Leah. All right. Now, one other side note, and then we will end our lesson for today. Look at Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19. Leviticus, Numbers. Leviticus 19, verses 17 and 18. Let's see, Leviticus 19. Okay, that is not the passage I was looking at. It's Leviticus 18, Leviticus 18, 17 and 18. Okay. It says here, verses 17 and 18 of Leviticus 18, Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, neither shalt thou take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness, for they are her near kinswoman. It is wickedness. Neither shalt thou take a wife to her sister, to vex her, to uncover her nakedness, beside the other in her lifetime. And so it's interesting that in Leviticus, it's specifically laid out, if you're going to have more than one wife, then that wife cannot be the daughter of the woman you marry. It cannot be the granddaughter of the woman you marry. And in verse number 18, it says very clearly, it cannot be the sister of the woman you're already married to, as long as the woman you're already married to is alive. And so it's okay to marry a sister after the first sister has died, but to have two sisters together, there's a word in this verse, it says here, to vex her. In other words, it's already getting complicated if you have more than one wife. But if you have more than one wife, it's only going to vex the first wife if you marry her sister. Which means this, it will only lead to trouble when a person marries two sisters while both are still alive. Is that going to come true in Jacob's life? Well, Lord willing, we'll explore that next time.